You're listening to Mark of the Maker. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Steiner and you're listening to Mark of the Maker, and this is episode 62 of the show, and this is going to be a continuation of our discussion that we had last time around, and I think we'll get into it pretty quick here. Let's make sure we have the normal crew with us. We have Mr. Michael Birch.
Here.
We have Mr. Tom Crine.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, classy. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's me.
I'm a classy guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Mr. Sean Kendrick is with us.
And I'm not classy.
Oh, no. We've had plenty of Sean tip of the top hat monocle kind of intros before.
Oh, the old razzle dazzle.
The old razzle dazzle, exactly. All right, and once again, like last time, we have Rick Hinderer is joining us. Hi, Rick.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us again. We had lots more to talk about where we left off last time. We didn't even get to the modern era, I don't think.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate having me on, guys.
This is our cheater version of a knife show. We actually get to talk to our friends about knives, and that seems like a lot of times that happens at a show or something, and so we cheat the whole scene by just doing it every couple weeks live.
Yeah. Been kind of nice this last month or year, actually. Month.
Yeah.
Yeah, a year that felt like a month. They couldn't tell the difference because time stopped or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, the thing of it, we talked about it before, the fact that, the year of no shows,
yes.
And I tell you, that's what I miss. I miss stuff like this of,
yes.
Sitting around, having a couple beverages and just talking knives and stuff. That so many knives get designed on napkins from knife shows.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like all of us like-minded, knife nerds are like, we start talking at a show and like, oh, man, this and this. Oh, hey. And then it's like, okay, where's the napkin at? I got to write this shit down.
Exactly.
And then you're showing somebody and, showing somebody this, and then, you take and you leave, you keep all these napkins and stuff because years later, that's archives of,
yeah,
holy crap, this is a new model of knife, a new this or a new that. And it's like, holy crap, it actually worked.
Yeah, the only written record available, right, is a bar napkin probably.
Yeah, from Caesar's Palace or Monogram. You look at it, it's like, oh yeah, we were at this place or that place, and so
many great ideas have been sketched out on a bar napkin. That's a fact.
Oh, let me tell you, yeah,
all kinds of industries.
Yep,
and politics. All kinds of stuff. Yep. We're not going there though.
I bet the percentage though of bad to good.
Yeah.
Well, you know, sometimes you got to make a few before you pop up with the magical one.
Uh-huh.
Oh, most definitely. And as we talked before, not all of them ends up, there's a reason why, what do they call that? In show business, the cutting room floor or whatever.
Yes. Yeah, there's a few that don't survive the cull, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, some of it, it's like, what the hell was I thinking? It's like, okay, I hope nobody else sees that.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so last time when we were talking, it was kind of I don't know, maybe the first half of the Hinderer story, right? Personal stuff and how you grew up. I think that was super insightful and helpful to understand kind of how you got to where you were. And then just started to scratch the surface of the CNC thing, right? And you were learning G-code the hard way and, not having some of the modern tools that we have today, obviously. Maybe in a great deal of figured out as you go, which I think happens in some cases today anyway, but maybe not to the same degree. So let's take it from there. That was a transition time for your business, right? From being art knives and what sounded like largely doing what you wanted to do, right? Hopefully that lines up with a customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to sell knives, but from that into something much more modern and different.
Yeah, yeah. So when I got that first CNC, machine, the first CNC machine again was the lathe, and then I transitioned to the machining center, which ended up, that was like, okay, now we can start into the knife part, whereas the lathe was more in the pens, and with that the CAD system, and the CAD system, during the transitional period with some of those knives that I was doing, I wasn't doing like real intricate stuff because I was just learning, CAD. So some of those first knives in that what kind of the transitional period were fixed blades. Like I did a fixed blade dagger that was real easy to draw up in CAD, and then a folder design that I called the UTF, which was actually the precursor of the FireTac, which I would end up doing a little bit later.
Okay.
So those were those types of knives. I would only make like 2 or 3 of them. It wasn't the production type based stuff that we're doing now, and so that was a true transition because it was from when I was making knives one at a time by hand on a grinder, cutting things out with a bandsaw, stuff like that, into utilizing CNC technology, which is more of a production type, machine. Even though obviously you can use them for one at a time, but it's more for making a lot of parts.
Right.
But I didn't. I was still in the mindset of very, very small quantities, and also it was just so I could learn, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into, especially designing with CAD.
Yeah.
It's totally different than taking, and putting your thoughts on paper and then cutting out, paper designs to see if the folders work, and changing this and using pieces of plastic that some knife makers use, to check to make sure, the blade falls into the handle where it's supposed to, different things like that.
Yeah.
And that's how I did it before. And then transitioning to in a CAD system, that's a real challenge because of the fact that when you're cutting it out like on a piece of plastic or something, you can kind of physically like feel it. You can put it in your hand and you can feel, okay, that handle's a little bit long, or the finger cutout isn't quite right. I'll just grind it a little bit and then feel like, oh, okay, that feels better.
Right.
So in that sense, doing it with templates, that's the word I was trying to find. Doing it with templates and plastic cutouts is a little bit easier when it comes to designing on how the knife should fit and feel. When you're doing it on a computer, there's no sense of size or anything. So you can't just start drawing entities in a CAD program and be able to get the sense of how is that going to feel in my hand. And you can't unless you actually cut something out. So you're not going to, in those first designs, I wasn't going to cut 25 pieces of expensive titanium just to find out that, oh, gee, that doesn't feel very good.
Right. Yeah, you got to do some prototyping work up front, right?
Well, yeah, prototyping, and we're talking, it's going to be weeks. This is the learning process that, trying to transfer what you've always done by hand into the, unknown, unmeasurable universe that's in a computer. Yeah, because you can make that knife as small as you want or as big as you want on a computer screen, but you don't get the sense of size on it. So that was a real challenge in that transitional period before I really, started the production thing, that learning process in design work, figuring that out.
So Rick,
Yeah.
when you were making knives more handmade style, right? Like you said, paper templates and other stuff.
Mhm.
Did you, because I know different, it's one of the things that this show's made very clear to listeners is knife makers do it different. They all do it different, right? Right.
Absolutely.
They don't all have the same approach. And
Right.
some of that's personality and some of it's style. And sometimes it's necessity, right? To not have enough equipment to be able to just leave things set up for a specific operation. So
Yeah.
in your earlier knife making, were you a batch guy? Like, where you do a certain process on knives that you had in motion? Or were you like, I'm going to pick this one up and I'm not putting it down until I'm done with this knife?
Oh yeah, I was a one at a time.
Okay.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Back in the early days, I didn't make any. I mean, I couldn't. I don't know whether it's just because I don't know. I'd start on a piece of steel and forge it, and yeah, and literally, you're right, Mark. I couldn't put it down until I finished it.
Right.
This could be 6 a.m,
Yeah.
and I'm like, at midnight, I'm like, oh hell no! I get some Mountain Dew, a pack of cigarettes, and I'm good to go.
There you go. Fuel of champions.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd be bebopping to whatever up in the shop, at 3 a.m. Thank God I lived on a farm to where the neighbors couldn't hear me.
That you know of.
Yeah. Not in my underwear. I was fully clothed.
Alleged.
Is that going to be our new shirt, Mark?
What's that? Rick
Knife
and his-
makers do it different.
Oh, it could be. It could be.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to clip that out. We don't want that out there for people to steal.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
I
like it.
like it. Yeah, that could work. Maybe that'd be a limited edition thing.
Yeah. Patches, mugs, the whole deal.
Yeah. Exactly.
Provocative. People will love it.
All right. So you were a one at a time kind of guy, kind of making this transition, still doing a little bit of one at a time, trying to get a feel for, how, like you said, how to understand scale and shape, right, on the screen.
Right. And that as I was progressing through that learning process of that, of again, now instead of making knives one at a time, it's making knives with computer aided technology and which transfer CNC as far as a CNC mill or machining center in the knife making realm absolutely has to couple with CAD. It absolutely has. It's different than a machine shop that if you're making this widget, even though most machine shops still use CAD, if you're making this widget, especially if it's more linear, X minus, Y minus, stuff like that, you could be able to program that directly into the control, no problem. But with obviously knife handles and blades, you're looking at multiple entities of different, arcs and blending of arcs and things like that. And that was, especially the blending of arcs, even in CAD, is not an easy task.
Right.
Yeah, you end up with a lot of when two arcs blend. What do they call that, Michael? I can't remember. It's
Bunch of shit.
bunch of shit. Exactly.
It's a spline.
Sometimes.
It could be one nice smooth arc, which is like 3 or 4 different arcs, different radii blended together. If it doesn't blend properly, it's a bunch of shit.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And when we belly up to a grinder, you don't know it when you're actually grinding the shape of a handle, but you're blending multiple arcs and radii all together. So
Right.
you're not going to see a transition between a, say a 20-inch, radii arc into a 15-inch radii into a 10.25 radii. You don't see that when you grind it by hand. So you have a nice transition, obviously. But if you were to do that, if you were to take and do that in CAD and not blend those together, it would be a bunch of shit. You would see the breaks in between those. So those are very frustrating when you take somebody who's never done anything with this and didn't go to school to do it. it's like, how do you make sure I mill that out and I look at it, I'm like, whoa, crap, what the heck? And this
Yeah,
is why, it could be, you get a lot of gray hairs from that. So, especially,
I think Michael's had some of that same experience. I hear a lot of things that you're saying that sound a lot like what I know Michael had to work through with his transition from drawing stuff by hand to drawing it on the computer. And you want to talk about that a little, Michael? I mean, all that stuff about scale and shapes and.
Well, yeah, what he's saying, I've done all of that. And it's like what he's talking about, the complex curves. You don't think about it when you're grinding, but it's like a design trap you can fall into with CAD, where it's very easy to make a complete circle and then do an arc off of that. But it looks exactly like a robot made it.
Right.
It's very hard to make a natural flowing looking knife in CAD. And it can be frustrating and confusing, and you just want to bash your head in. And then sometimes, I actually did this not long ago, like 3 days ago. Drew a knife, I put it in, traced it, scanned it, traced over it, then realized I drew it like 2 inches long, a fixed blade. And I was like, well, shit.
Well,
yeah.
I think for sure you can, at least I can, oftentimes tell when somebody designs in CAD versus a drawing and then putting it into CAD.
Yeah, that is, so what that is a raster image, and you vectorize that, you draw it, and that's how I start with my design, is I do a raster image. In other words, I draw it on a piece of paper.
Right.
And then I take that and I scan it, and it's called a raster image in the CAD world. And then I vectorize that. What it does, it takes the line, which is nothing more than pixels, and it takes that and it puts a infinite line, which is CAD, an entity, and it's not exact, but it at least gives you an outline.
Right.
And then you go in there and you clean that up. Now, what that does is, because of the fact, like myself, I cannot go straight to the computer, open up my CAD software like SolidWorks, and start with a fresh new design and be able to get those what I call art generated lines and feel, and that's art, and that comes from each one of us, me, Michael, Tom, Sean, all of us that are born with this damn affinity for knives, and we may not be able to play basketball on a pro level, but God gave us this ability in our brain to know what a good knife is and what it should feel like. And you can't go to a computer and just start drawing that. So that has to come. It just comes out. It's like a writer writing a book. It just comes out.
Right. It flows.
Exactly. And that's where I think some of the knife companies, and they do a great job, but when you, and I'm not, and please, everybody out there that's listening to this, don't take this the wrong way. I'm very good friends with a lot of engineers from the companies. So, but at the same time, I think when you can't, like, I can't go to college. If I went to college and learned art, it doesn't matter how many years I spend in college, I am not going to be able to draw a pretty picture. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
There's artists that don't go to college that are unbelievable. They could sit down, and it fascinates me. They could draw a picture I'm like, oh my God, how do you do that? I don't know. I just do it.
Right. Right.
And I think that's the same with some of us knife makers that, we've just, I don't know why I drew these lines, these arcs the way I did, other than the fact that that's a good knife to me,
Yeah.
So I think that by drawing it by hand on a piece of paper, like what we always do. That's the start of everything. No matter how much, if you have a $250,000 CNC machine, that is not going to make you a knife maker. That's not going to make you that person that puts out, you know, an award-winning design. It's not going to do it. You have that still comes from you.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's true with lots of stuff, right? Whether it's, you know, even like sports, like you mentioned, right? There's people that can see stuff at a speed that we can't, right? And as a result, they can make decisions and respond or react in ways that I certainly can't, right? Just because they process it a different way, or musicians where, you know what I mean? They can hear music and they can hear notes. And a lot of times, you know, I learned the hard way because my wife is this way. I'm like, what do you mean you can't hear the bass? Like the actual bass guitar in this song. Like, you can't pick the bass out? Well, no, I just hear the music. And it's like, whoa, okay. Weird, right? So yeah, seems no question that there's a design talent there that where you understand if you have good designs, it means that you can also see what good design looks like, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The ability to see it is a huge thing.
Yeah. And
Wait a minute. That's a thing? What you just said about not being able to hear like bass and stuff, I've never heard that before.
Yeah. Wise ass.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting thing. We've actually had guests on that say the opposite, I think, right? Haven't we, Michael, where we have had people that draw right in the CAD program? They're not paper people.
Yeah, and I think we also pick paper because that's how we learn. We know what a curve feels and looks and whatever. I've made myself draw 2 knives, 2 folders out in space, you know, which is crazy to me because it feels like I have no perspective.
Right.
But it was a good exercise. I made myself do it, but then I do a lot of printing off so I can see it. There's something about printing it out and looking at it, and you know, it's strange.
I think Richard Rogers is the one you're thinking of, Mark.
Maybe so.
That doesn't draw designs only in CAD.
I thought Jerry kind of turned into that too.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe so.
Jerry McGinnis. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think it's everybody's got a version of a talent, right? And
yeah. If we could be able to, I mean, I tried and it just didn't. I actually got one of those Waco pads.
Oh yeah, yep.
And
like a drawing tablet pad.
Both of the makers we just mentioned, you know, I had said that you could tell when somebody designs in CAD. Those are both exceptions to the rules. And I think it's because they're knife makers. You know, they didn't start designing in CAD.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like savants, but yeah.
You know, it's an interesting thing to think about when you think about the future, right? And this is, Michael and I have been talking about this a lot lately because we started down the 3D printer path. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future, because I think there are already a number of designs out there that existed only electronically, right? They've never been drawn. They didn't start out as a paper drawing. And some of that's generational, right? Because like you said, probably part of it is the way you started out, right? That feels like home or feels comfortable or natural. But I think as additional generations come along, you're going to see some interesting stuff happen, I think, because, you know, we've talked before about designers who don't feel constrained the same way, right? They don't go into it with rules around, no, you can't do that. You have to do this over here this way. And some of that's true, right? And some of it's kind of, it has to be because you made it have to be.
I think most knife makers design around their tools.
Sure.
Doesn't make sense to make something if you can't, you know, design something if you can't make it.
Right.
And so I think that is kind of a limiting factor in some of our thought processes and design processes, where some of these new designers who haven't actually made a knife they're not limited by that.
Yeah, and as a result, the designs look different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with the different design. For me, I look at it as sort of a handicap to my own design work because I feel like I have to have my hand in the picture because
Right,
that's what's going to be
100%.
holding it. But that's me, and that's my handicap because I should be able to just, been doing it long enough. I should be able to do it, but it's tough.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes we just go with what has been successful for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's logical.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, I'm going to keep doing what has always worked in the past. And, and it's kind of, and that's what, I mean, when I was going through the process of learning that, believe me, it's still a learning process. I mean, I haven't like slowed down or stopped the learning part. It's still, I mean, every day I go down to the shop, there's something new, that, and that's only because I seek out that learning part. But at the same time, it kind of goes back to, well, I'm comfortable here. This is my comfort blanket. This is, I start out with this. I start out on paper. I put it in CAD and then clean it up and then go from there and making pretty much engineering it from that point.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. You can move so much and change so much with such small movements in CAD. That's what I don't miss is the big black smudges of eraser marks where my stop pin location got moved 20 times. And
Yep. And CAD, you can move it 5 thou. It's kind of hard to, move something a couple thou with a pencil.
I think that's an artistic thing. The thing you just mentioned, Rick, the idea of comfort, right? And I think you see that a lot with artists that create paintings and drawings and sculpture, right? I think you find if you dig into it, a lot of them have the same thing, right? They need to be in the right space, with the right materials, right? With the paint or drawing tools that they prefer. And if they don't have those things, then it's uncomfortable and weird, right? Or writers, right, that need to be in the right mindset under the right amount of stress with the right kind of coffee in their cup, all kinds of stuff. I think that's an artistic thing. And I don't know that that's something that knife makers get enough credit for, that there's an honest art aspect there for most makers, I think.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that because I remember, like when we, as makers, we design something, we engineer it because especially folders, they got to work, and it's kind of like one guy told me, he said, well, you're not an engineer. I'm like, no, but I got a degree in practical engineering. It's like, and that means I can't tell you why it works. I just know it works because I tried the shit and it didn't work, and I tried something else until I found it worked. So that's practical engineering.
That's how it goes.
And we've talked about that on the show before about sometimes I truly believe not knowing what I'm not supposed to do sometimes may be a benefit because I don't know constraints. It means I can mess stuff up a lot easier, but it also means I don't know that I'm not supposed to try something that's probably obvious to machinist.
Right.
Well, the thing about that is, and this is something that I don't know. I may have mentioned it before that us as especially us old timers as teachers, it's kind of we want to pass on the torch, and I think that's a very important thing. But at the same time, it's also the aspect of I'm going to try some. I don't know why, but I'm going to try it. Not having constraints, and I think some of the young makers coming up, they put themselves in a box by it being easy to go online and look at what all of us have done and say, well, this is how you're supposed to do it. I never ever tell a maker this is how you have to do it, because how are they going to mess up and then find that next better mousetrap?
Yeah.
If they get in the comfort of, well, I'll just make this blade like Shane makes it,
Right.
or Sean makes it, and it's like, it's okay. Well, that's great, but if you didn't have any of that, and And you're just like, well, I just want to make a knife, and I'm just going to do what I think. And all of a sudden, it's like, holy crap, you got an award-winning, or not even award-winning, but I say award-winning in the fact that the customers, the buying public, they're like, wow, that's really cool, and that goes with mechanisms, that goes with how we grind the tangs on our locks, all of that stuff. And I think all of us here on the program know that we've all done that. We've all went out on that limb and messed up a whole bunch of stuff, to advance the industry. And I think
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Again, step outside that box and and do something. Did I tell you guys my story about Ozzy Osbourne?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, where he was in the
Yeah,
car with the
yeah.
guy. Oh, then he went to see the guy that
Okay,
imitated his work.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's like my best analogy of all that.
Right.
So
Right.
so when I was learning the CNC and getting back to that, going through that transition period, there was a lot of gosh, I have no idea, how to do this, So I'm just gonna okay, we'll try this G code and see what happens. Oh well, there I broke another $28 256 tap. That didn't work, So it was a lot of, with the intricacies of even my folders now, all of that was, just trial and error, through that. And I certainly didn't want to do it on batches of 100.
Right.
Mm-mm.
So what did you land on? What after you made it through this kind of trial by fire, what designs did you kind of land on?
Kind of land on the Fire Attack. The Fire Attack was the first batch of more successful tactical type using folders. And I was making them in batches of 15. So that was, I felt comfortable with running 15 lock sides, 15 liners, 15 blades, and doing that. And I made all of my own hardware at that time. So I didn't buy any screws or anything. I made them all. And that slowed down some of that process. But the reason I did that is because I didn't want to have design constraints around off-the-shelf hardware. So I would design a knife how I think I like it, and then obviously you can't buy that and how I designed it, so I just made it. But I had a CNC lathe at the time that could help me do that.
Yeah.
Well, and people don't realize, the hardware we have today wasn't available back then. It was crap.
Exactly. Exactly. I started making, when I, like my pivots, the pivot barrels that are out that you could use, your tolerances were maybe minus 1 thou, but more than likely they were plus or minus 1 thou. And you can't make a good folder with that kind of tolerance. So it was, so I was like, well, and plus I wanted a harder material, so I wanted to make them out of 17.4, and nobody definitely was making even just regular barrels out of 17.4. So I designed all of the hardware and was making that and learning the CNC lathe work, because, when you're looking at a tolerance of, minus, I was trying to get down to minus half thou, now a lot of people, I'm sure you guys know, minus half thou is very, very hard to measure. You can hold it in your hand and grow it by a half thou. So it kind of cracks me up when people say, "Oh, Dad, this is, I get mine a half thou and I know they're all." I'm like, then you don't know. You're not a machinist. You don't know what a half thou really is.
Yeah.
So people come in the shop, I give them the demonstration. Because I've got really, really nice bench mics, and I'll mic apart, and then I'll hold it in my hand for 15 minutes while I'm talking to them. We'll mic it again, and they're like, "You got to be kidding!" I'm like, "Yeah." So that's why we have a company close to us that does medical stuff, and they have a climate controlled lab that they measure stuff in. and they're measuring, I mean, they're getting down to really, really fine stuff, but anyway.
Yeah, the environment really, really matters.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I, and again, this is all part of the learning process for somebody like myself who was not trained machinist. I'm just a farrier and a horse trainer.
So you're making the fire tack in small batches, and you're making the hardware as well. Were you buying stuff from anybody at that point, or was this becoming like a sole authorship thing?
Yeah, it was a sole authorship, and a big thing, especially, if you outsource a part, that makes it a whole lot more difficult because and especially back then when maybe my tolerances weren't, like this handle would be off a little bit. If you outsource parts, you give another company, an outside vendor, a part print, they're going to make that part to that print. So if you screw up,
right,
then
right, yeah,
you've just spent a lot of money for nothing.
Yep.
And so it was easier just to make everything, and that way I could change on the fly. It's like, oh, okay, so I didn't do it this way. That's no big deal. It's like making a knife by hand. It's like, well, I'll change the CAD, we'll tweak this, and it comes out to be a good knife. So, and that's, again, part of all that learning process that, took a few years to really, really perfect, to where, you can make 1,000 knives and have everything be absolutely perfect,
right.
and I did, and that really helped me in the future with where I went with my designs, and which, still a lot of companies, and makers are like, because I designed a knife, which was the XM18. I wanted to be, a customer could take it apart, add accessories, put it back together, and it's still just like when they got it from the shop.
Yeah.
And that's kind of tough to do. You have to be very confident in your machining and your tolerances and how you manufacture these parts, because, like for instance, the handle nuts in the back.
Yeah.
We ship the knife out with the standard stainless hardware, but people can buy titanium handle nuts and change it out of their knife. Well, if you're off on those tolerances, then you either have a knife that's not going to work very good anymore once the customer puts new parts in, or you're going to they won't be able to get it back together.
Yeah.
So all of the earlier stuff that I did with the design and everything, and having to make my own parts, kind of helped me out once I started more and more into the production realm. So yeah, the fire tack helped out tremendously with that. And when I went, from the fire tack into the can't remember the model name. It was before the XM18. It's what the XM18 morphed from.
You had one called the Flame, right?
Flame, that's it. That's
okay.
it. Thank you, Mark.
So before we get into the Flame, the fire tack, was it a success for you? I mean, were you starting to find right place, right time with the right design kind of thing? People were picking it up and there was demand for it. That was a successful project?
Yeah.
Aside from the learning piece of it?
Yeah, aside from the learning piece of it, absolutely. It was very, very successful. And so it also, right around that time period, was when I started with Benchmade and Gerber. So, which really helped me with my design evolution of knowing I was going in the right direction.
Okay.
So that was all about the same time period.
Okay.
And and that's really pretty much all I did. All I made as far as folders at that time was, the fire tack. And then I started, again, just this design evolution,
yeah.
And designing for, having designs for Gerber and Benchmade helped out, because that pushed me even more into the design aspect of it.
Right.
Because I designed knives for them that I didn't make on my own. So that part of it really helped with my designing and because they needed designs that were producible. So, that kind of steered me into, okay, we need to, not only it needs to be design compatible for what I want, which is a good using knife, but it also has to be producible.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And I got, engineers and designers are in the manufacturing know that it's got to be, you want it to do what you want it to do, but you have to be able to duplicate that in the manufacturing realm.
Yeah.
And with myself not having any of that experience at all, being a horse trainer, of course, I didn't understand what that was. And designing for the companies really helped me start to grasp the concept of that. And as I was doing the fire tack and then transitioned into the flame and a couple of the other models, you start to see some of those elements come out.
Yeah. So you were able to take experience from that work with Benchmade and Gerber and learn from it for your own stuff. Mm-hmm. Like their feedback, I assume, about, oh, okay, we see what you're trying to do here, Rick, but we can't make that way, or we can't make it that way in volume, or can't make it that way accurately, repeatedly, or that kind of stuff. Is that the sort of feedback that you were getting?
Well, kind of, not in a like, okay, we had a meeting and it was more like I wanted to make sure that I produced a design that, they didn't come back to me and say, hey, we can't make that. It was pretty much me understanding
Gotcha.
by working in that environment. So I kind of took it on my own to learn that. It's like, oh, okay, well, this is something that this very tight arc in this area, I need to do something different than that, because that means a really small end mill has to go into that area.
Right.
Very small end mills tend to break.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, maybe the design, I'm not compromising on the design. I'm thinking in my head ahead of time that, okay, well, let's change this. And it allows that manufacturing part of it to where if you're making it one at a time, and especially by hand, it would, that portion of it wouldn't matter to you. So those were some things that I learned as I was, and it helped in the design mode with the other companies. Because myself, I can only make so many knives.
Right.
Even having a machining center, I can only make so many. But having the design open to other companies, that allowed me to design more knives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can look at it and say that pocket or whatever is going to take too long. It's not going to be cost prohibitive for them to make it. I mean, that's. Mm-hmm. I mean, you kind of put yourself in a very, like you said, good position to design for them. And sometimes it's kind of, I don't know, the CAD CAM and production work, big air quotes around my production, but having to be the Debbie Downer of, oh, that would be very costly or too much time to make a bunch of those types of things, kind of hinders the art side of you.
Right.
But it goes hand in hand.
Exactly. And that's where blending those two together, that was it was a learning process, but it wasn't like a brick wall. It was more of just a steering, kind of thing. And something that obviously I didn't see right away. It's just something that subliminally you do. It's like, okay, well, I'm thinking about this in my head. If I never had that mass production mode, I probably never even would have thought about that. But having that and having the CNC myself and knowing what they know, it made it a whole lot easier for me to work with them.
Right.
And I think gave me maybe a little bit more of a step up when I started with the companies in the design area, is having that knowledge, because that's how I did it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it was, once I started into the flame, again, this is still pretty small batch, stuff. And in fact, the first XM18, and the XM18, which obviously everybody knows, that's my flagship model, is the XM18. And, that actually grew from the flame. how that transitions actually goes back to, what we were just talking about. As I was, the flame, Mark, I think you remember those were, titanium lock side, titanium handle, inner frame,
Yep.
that type of, and I made not that many of the flame, but a fair amount.
Yeah.
In other words, fair amount was like maybe, I don't know, 30.
Right. A lot less than the fire tack.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so, as I was making them, everybody really liked the design, and I'm like, okay, there's no way I could be able to make enough of these. It just ain't going to happen. But I wanted to get that design, not necessarily that knife, but that design in more hands. Because at this time, I was really, knee deep into the fire department. And a lot of my experiences on the fire department were starting to affect some of my design, especially with folding knives.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to make that design into a knife that perhaps would have a better price point, but not compromise anything on the build, because that's what I wanted, first responders especially to be able to have a knife that they can afford, that felt really good in their hand and they can use as a tool. So when I went kind of back to the drawing board and simplified the manufacturing part of it, not the design itself, but the manufacturing part of it.
Yeah.
And that's where I came up with the configuration that it ended up being. I think it was like a couple generations before I settled on the final configuration.
Okay.
And the XM, XM18 means XM is the military for experimental model, because that was my first experiment into production knife making.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask. Is it seems like these were an evolutionary path from the fire tack to the flame. That step, was it really like, okay, based on my experience with the fire tack, I'm going to do this other knife that's a slightly different design. And then you realize, okay, this is a nice design, but I can't make this.
Yeah.
I can't make enough of these the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it was more of an expensive knife.
Yeah. Okay. And so the iteration from there was, okay, let's make a producible model. And that's the XM was the next evolution of that path.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And that was the evolution into more of a production, type mindset.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was still just me in the shop. It was just me and my machines, and and rock and roll, and even still, the batch size was the largest I did at that time was 25 knives.
Yeah.
And I was starting to learn and feel confident in my CAD and CNC abilities at the time to be able to, cut 25 lock sides and 25 blades, and no, I'm not going to scrap all of it.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right? That's a big point to reach, where you can produce parts in volume and actually expect them to work properly going together without without a whole bunch of dicking around, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was a big jump for me.
Now at that time, if you're cutting 25 out, were you hand grinding all those, or?
Yes.
How was that working? Okay.
Yeah. So those are still all hand ground. So I pretty much, I would mill out the lock sides, and then of course the handles, the liners. That's when I ended up with at that time period with the texture that of course is synonymous with my knives now. And that was a big deal. That type of texture that I did, that's a 3D machine texture.
Yeah.
And it was, that was a pretty big deal. I was very proud of doing that, because of the fact I did it. It's a 3D texture that I did in a two-dimensional way. and it took a lot of playing around to be able to get it to where I want, and a lot of scrap G10. So
And a jacked up mill, right? Because it's no fun to cut G10 in the machine, and doesn't it get all gunky and weird? And
yeah, we do it. We do it now. We do it, with vacuum plates.
yeah,
And it gets all gunky, but yeah, we do it wet. We machine it wet.
yeah, there you go.
So the major reason is because I don't want any of that dust in the air. So
Right.
yeah, it's not good. But yeah, so once I'd get everything cut out, and I'd mill the blades out, and then I would surface grind them. I did all that by hand, and heat treat, and then I would grind hard, and so then I would belly up to the grinder and grind all of them, and then finish them. And again, at that time, it was still just me in the shop. So I would go, from step A to step, Z on, 100% on the knife. And then, once I started into the XM18 realm and I did the 25, and it's like, then those really took off. And that was when I was still in my very, very small shop. And it was on a squad call one time, and I was venting to my my officer about I had to get back to the shop because we're on this squad call, and I'm like, dude, I gotta get back to the shop. I got tons of stuff I got to do. And he's like, well, I'll help you. And I'm like, okay, cool. So he got off duty, and I got back home, and he came out, and I put him on the surface grinder, and he liked it so much I ended up hiring him part-time. He came out on his days off, and he would grind blades on a surface grinder.
Oh, nice.
And so he ended up being my first kind of employee. Wow. And, he's the guy, the grunt that either cuts out blades on a bandsaw or.
Yeah.
And that was, and I ended up, and the other reason why is because I wanted to get more knives out there. And because, and somebody orders a knife, it's like, hey, I want this. You don't want to say, well, nah, I'm just going to, do what I do. I kind of like, oh, cool. This can grow. This is kind of neat.
Right.
And so it worked out that way for a little while. And in fact, he would do stuff while I'm grinding blades, and I'm finishing them and doing ham rud finishes and stuff like that. And I kept it at around 25 there for a while as far as batch size. And then Lori and I decided we wanted to move out of the horse barn. And
yeah.
So we had ended up buying the neighboring property, which is 52 acres. And we had it for about 10 years until we could finally maybe afford a log home, because we always wanted to live in a log home. And I needed a bigger shop, because a bigger shop was going to pay for the home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because there's no way I could afford it by, the production I was doing at the time. And so that's when I built, and of course, as knife maker fashion, the shop goes up first before the house.
Of course.
So that's when I built the 3,000 square foot shop, which is now Roscoe's. And
right. That's where you are right now recording with us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And at that time, it was still pretty much me, and every once in a while, my lieutenant at the fire department.
Okay.
And of course, during that time, I was working on designs, for Gerber and Benchmade, and that's when I designed the Gerber Hinderer Rescue. That was when I was still in the fire department, and designed that knife. And so all of that fire department kind of influence, once I came back to a bigger shop and really started thinking about, more production, because at that time, 25 knives was not going to be enough. And
Right.
so I started thinking about, okay, the next step is, let's try 50 knives. Well, it was starting to get to a point that there was no way, unless I wanted to grind. Now, if I was a Tom Crine, I might be able to have done it. But I can't grind like Tom.
I'm not sure anybody can.
Yeah, fact.
They're not dumb enough.
No one's foolish enough to do that. Yeah.
But I knew that. It would take me weeks to grind all of that, and so that's when I contacted a outside vendor for grinding, and ended up I'm looking at, okay, I can have these blades CNC ground, and really and to step back a little bit, I call even the knives that I was grinding by hand when I was making batches of 25, I called them production knives. And because in my mind, I was producing, so that's a production. That's kind of like, more, I was doing more knives design than one. And again, I go back, I think that stems back when I was doing art knives.
Yeah.
And so when I decided, and I tell you what, you talk about scary, is send 50 blades that cost how much money in steel and time and machining them, send them out to a grinder and keep your fingers crossed.
Right. Right.
So especially knowing that if they screwed them all up, I may not be able to survive this financially.
Yeah. So with I don't even know what to call it. I guess I'm just going to call it Roscoe's because I don't know. That's the first shop of yours that I ever visited. I never went to the barn
Right.
shop. So that to me, I guess I think of it as the old shop, but in your world, it's not that old.
Yeah.
So what was this expansion? Obviously it's financially driven, right? Like, hey, I got to make some money. And also driven by, okay, I built this big shop with intent to do that. Like that was a plan, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
Right? To like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to build this big shop and I know the kinds of things, some of them that I'm going to need to do to scale this thing, and let's start walking down that path.
When I built the shop, it was, of course, obviously now I have a lot bigger payment. So
Yes.
yeah. So that, believe me, that's a what do they call that? A drivener. That's
A motivator.
Motivator. Yeah. A big
Yes.
motivator. Especially when Lori was the chief financial officer.
Yes.
So it was, I now I had a payment for a building. So that was a big motivator. But honestly, in my mind, and maybe this might have been foolish on my part, but a bigger motivator was I had a bunch of people that wanted my knives.
Yeah.
And it's still, even today, it's my biggest thrill is somebody buying one of my knives, because even way back when, it was the pride in knowing that somebody is going to put out this much, $400, $500, $600 of their hard-earned money for something that I created.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know you guys get that feeling too. I mean, we all do. It's like, wow, this is so damn cool,
Mm-hmm.
and very humbling,
Oh yeah.
and so I knew a lot of people wanted the XM18. And so there was like, okay, yeah, or I'm going to be able to grow my business, but the main motivator was being able to, make more people happy of being able to purchase something that we made.
Yeah.
And it was because honestly, the money that I made went right back into the business. I mean, after I paid my bills, it's like, okay, I'll go buy another machine. This is cool.
Yeah, right. More stuff to play with. And oh, by the way, I can make more money or make the business stronger. But look at that.
Exactly. Believe me, that's the main motivator. And it's what's really cool. It's like, I bought that another lathe, and so this time I had two CNC lathes, and so I bought another Fidel machining center, and these were new. Ever since my lemon lathe, I was like, I'm only going to buy new machines, and that way, because the one thing about a new machine, it costs more money, but you have a year warranty. So you have a year that machine will make you money. At the very, I know a lot of knife makers that have went the cheap route. So I'm going to buy this used one, and I ask them a year later. They'll spend like, okay, instead of $100,000, say they'll spend $30,000 for a used machine. And a year later, I'm like, oh, say, how's it going with that? Yeah, well, I haven't been able to get it running.
Yeah.
So you spent $30,000 for something you haven't made a dime on. You could have spent $100,000 and you'd already have it 3/4 of the way paid off.
Right. Yep.
So
when you built Roscoe's, they're kind of the first big shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty big building, right? Especially when it's you and a guy helping sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So, we're guys, right? So if you're going to build a building, of course, you're going to build the biggest possible building you can, right? Because you're going to do stuff there. But it probably felt huge at first, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It was because the machines that I had fit in that little shop. Yeah. So I moved it back here, and I'm like, oh man, this is all I'll ever need. It's like, look, the machines that I had filled up the back part of the shop, and the front part, I played ball with Roscoe.
Right.
I throw the ball against the door, and we had knife classes in here. We'd roll mats out and have knife classes.
Exactly.
So yeah, it was. I'm like, I could scale this easy. This is all I'll ever need.
Right. It's cavernous.
Yeah. And so that ended up changing, and a lot of it is because of, I like buying machines, and I like making knives, and I started with getting more models, involved, and the demand for the XM18 kept growing. So, as well as the pens that I was making, the tactical pens.
Yeah, what spurred you to get back into the pen thing?
Yeah, we kind of skipped over that, didn't we? So, way back when I got my first CNC machine, I got it to make a pen.
Yeah, we talked about that part.
Yeah.
And then you kind of got away from it, like, okay, the pen thing isn't what I want to do.
Exactly. So how we got back into that is I had bought another CNC lathe. This was after a couple years, just with my little lathe, making little parts and stuff. So I bought I thought, okay, actually what started that was I was making a lock bar stabilizer for Strider. So they licensed the lock bar stabilizer from me, and I was like, hey Josh, I'll make the lock bar stabilizers, so you pay me for them, and the royalties is built in. They're like, yeah, that works out great. We don't have to worry about it. So I'm making these lock bar stabilizers, and actually Lori's making them. So a lot of the early ones on Strider knives, Lori made.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So she was my helper, so I had her running the lathe. And this lathe, it's not a production lathe. It just, we had so many of them that I knew I had to do something different. So I bought a larger lathe, and of course in my mind I had to justify the cost.
Right.
And you have to, like, okay, I'm going to make this, and this, and honestly, I justified buying that lathe because I was going to make flashlights. Because I had dinner with the founder, the guy who started Surefire, at the SHOT Show one year, and I had dinner with him just because I was just with friends, like, hey, this is so and so with this new company called Surefire, and the flashlights fascinated me, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna make flashlights. So that was kind of like a main motivator to buying this lathe. And when I got it, I'm like, again, I'm just learning CNC, and I'm like, this is kind of daunting. So I go make something simple so I can learn the machine, but make something that I could sell so that I can start paying for the machine, because the bank they want their money. And they don't care.
They're even tougher than Lori sometimes.
Exactly. They don't care that I don't know how to make a flashlight. And so I'm like, how about if I make a Kubaton? Because I've made these Kubatons before. And so I'm making this Kubaton. I'm like, what type of end? Because I was in the martial arts for many years, and I was like, what type of strike point or end should I make? And I started out making, I made a what I call a strike bezel and the bullet end, and I'm like, there's an awful lot of titanium to make a whole bunch of different Kubatons when a customer may want more of this than they want of this. So I'm like, well, how about make them interchangeable? Since I have a lathe, a CNC lathe, I can produce these ends and thread them and do tapping. So I'm learning all of that I need to know to make flashlight bodies, but I'm doing it on something that's a whole lot easier to do, or what I thought in my mind was easier to do.
Right.
And so that's how the modular Kubaton came to be.
Okay.
So I'm making and I did, really well in the first modular Kubatons. I'm like, I'd make 25 of them and sell them. And I'm like, how can I make them to where, more people would want to carry them? Because, it's hard for me to market something when, put this on your key ring and whap the crap out of somebody if you need to defend yourself. Well, most people wouldn't carry them because it's heavy and,
They're pretty good sized.
Yeah. 1/2-inch round titanium. And so I'm like, let's see, what does everybody carry on a day-to-day basis? A pen. So I went about engineering a pen attachment. So this was just an attachment that you could put on your modular Kubaton and turn it into a pen.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And that was the first tactical pen.
Nice.
So, and that was a big hit. Everybody, all of a sudden, I'm like making more modular Kubatons with the pen attachment than knives. And I'm cranking these out, and Lori's doing the, I came up with a display, or not a display, like a box that they all fit in and everything, and they end up doing really, really well. And people were buying them because it was a pen. And the Kubaton part of it kind of went away.
Yeah.
Not went away, but it just kind of fell back. So
became kind of secondary to the pen.
Yeah. Exactly. And plus the refill that I settled on for the modular Kubaton with the pen attachment was, of course, I went with the space pen. And the reason I went with the space pen for refill, because they're really tough. I did some torture testing with them, and they actually held up. So, because especially the modular Kubaton, the pen was secondary to what it was.
Yeah.
It was a tool, a self-defense tool first. So I wanted to keep that, that concept. But that pen refill on the first one was really small. So it'd run out real quick. And so I was, from there, I was like, what I should do is I should just design a standalone pen.
Yeah.
And I did it on the exact same dimensions as the modular Kubaton, but yet it was a standalone pen using a larger refill, like a regular pen refill.
Right.
And that actually kind of pushed me into a very difficult machining area, because I had to, the pen bodies were, I believe, almost 4 inches long. So I had to drill let's say a .270 hole almost 4 inches and keep it straight.
Right. Right.
In titanium.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty daunting task. I broke a lot of drills, and I learned a lot about drilling, deep hole drilling. And I learned about cobalt and parabolic drills and all this crazy stuff. And so that was a lot of fun. And that ended up being the extreme duty pen, which was still pretty much like the first tactical pen. Nobody was making tactical pens at this time. It was, in fact, luckily there's an article. At that time, I met a guy named Paul Markle, who was a writer for Guns Magazine, and there was a sister magazine called American Cop, and it was right after I started making the modular Kubotan with a pen attachment that he did an article on me. And
very cool.
Yeah, which is really cool because it set a timeline for when the first pen in a tactical sense was actually done. And I say in a tactical sense because any pen is a tactical pen if used in a tactical manner.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Sharpie makes a fine tactical pen.
True.
Exactly. So, but there's, and that was something when I did the extreme duty pen, I was like, okay, I'm making a pen out of titanium that is going to have to cost about $200 and some. How do you market a $200 and some pen in a BIC world?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and at the same time, I wanted a true self-defense tool.
Yeah, something capable.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how I came up with the design of the pen. And it ended up, it's not a marketing gimmick. You can actually take a regular pen and just in a normal strike, you strike an object with the regular pen and you don't get near the PSI on the tip of that strike because of the fact that the pen slips up through your fingers.
Yeah.
But you take, the modular Kubotan with the pen attachment, and because of the size of it and also the perpendicular grooves, it grabs into your hand. So you got a whole lot more PSI on that striking point. So in that sense, it truly does become a self-defense tool.
Yeah, they're very grippy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what makes a tactical pen different than a regular pen in that sense, But those ended up doing very, very well. We sold a lot of those extreme duty pens.
So Rick, in that time frame, when you're talking about marketing and having good sales and stuff, that was a combination of shows and doing stuff online. Like, were you selling through website or through the forums or?
Yeah, I didn't have a website at the time. So, back in that time period, that was actually even before my involvement in the internet. The FireTac, the tactical pens, that was before my involvement in the internet. So that was still going to shows. I was pretty much just going to shows and stuff.
Okay.
And getting that article in the magazine and things like that.
Yeah.
Once I started in the, and then at that time period with the extreme duty pen, and it was kind of like the sister production with the knives. Both of those were growing about the same time, and it's when the XM18 came along.
Yeah. Okay.
So, in the XM18, that's when I started in the marketing area. That's when I discovered the USN, and the USN was a huge, huge help, as it was to a lot of makers at that time period, as a marketing tool.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah.
And because it gave you a platform, to be able to, and it was an instant platform.
Yep.
And it was about that time when I made the first batch of XM18s, and I'm really developing the XM18, and that's when I started using standoffs. And then when the type of hardware in my knives at that point was starting to really reflect the robust nature that I wanted my designs to be. And because, before that I was using, like the FireTac had 256 hardware in the back and stuff like that. And when I went to the XM18, that's when I started going upsizing on my hardware, as well as the handle nuts at that time started, that's when I started making them out of 17.4 and really looking at the strength in the handle case, of the knife, and learning more about frame lock, which of course the frame lock goes to big kudos to Chris Reeve for coming up with a fantastic locking system. He's the one who developed it, and I always tip my hat to Chris for being the pioneer in an area that a lot of us makers have been able to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And improve upon. I mean, that the lock bar stabilizer came from an area that, okay, I think this could be improved upon. And when Chris called me up one day and asked about utilizing that in one of his folders, I'm telling you, I was like, oh wow,
I made it.
I'm honored. Thank you, Chris. Absolutely, you can use it.
Yeah, very cool.
But and then and in that time period, like with the marketing, of course, I had a 3,000 square foot shop that I had to pay for, and a new house I had to pay for, and I'm like, something, I need to be able to sell more of these knives. So USN came along, and again at the same time I digressed because I was still really developing the XM18. And so I knew I wanted to do some testing, and I knew, I pretty much knew what it could take, but I was on duty at the fire station one weekend, and we have to do what they call truck checks, which is one of us firefighters would actually check everything in a truck, make sure everything's where it's supposed to be and stuff like that. And, so I was moving the truck out of the station, and I thought, I wonder if I ran over this knife, what it would do to it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the hold my beer, thing. And
this could go great or could go horribly wrong.
Exactly. So, so I'm like, and I, of course I used the tanker because I figured the tanker had more weight. And I don't know, what, 10, 12 tons, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I opened the blade up and I put it underneath the wheel and I ran over it. And I went back and I'm like, well, it didn't look like it did too much. That's kind of cool. So I'm like, I'm going to try this again. So I parked it on top of it.
Yeah.
And it didn't, it kind of, it squished the handle down some, but it didn't break everything.
Yeah.
So, and then when I pulled it back off the knife, I'm like, it sprung right back and everything worked great. I'm like, hey, I'm onto something. This is really cool. And so then that's when I ended up, I got my newfangled digital camera.
Right.
With the 4-inch floppy disk.
Yeah.
And so my next weekend I came out, and so I parked the truck on top of the knife and took a picture of it. And that was one of my first actual marketing pictures. And it kind of went a little bit further than that. I went down to my range, my pistol range at the time, and I had a knife throwing target up. So of course I took my XM18 out of my pocket. I'm using it as a throwing knife.
Right.
And I'm thinking, this ought to be a pretty good test on that lock. And it's more of a test when it didn't stick. And in fact, I almost stabbed myself because I threw it. It bounced back at me, went right over my shoulder.
Not good.
Yeah. So, I'm doing this and I'm like, wow, it's actually it's really taken the punishment, really well. And it's really not peening the lock and the lock staying. And so I was really satisfied with all the results I was getting from it. And I put that picture of the knife sitting on a fire truck up on USN. Everybody was just like, wow. And a lot of people at that time still didn't know my using type knives. They still knew me as an art knife maker.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, that's really cool. So I put that video up, and that's what really shot my knife making career forward, so to speak. Because everybody was like, holy shit. It's like that knife can really take that punishment.
Right.
So I even, I like my new general manager, I told him when I first hired him, I said a lot of the goes back to that time period, that marketing that I did, and transitioning into that really more of a using type, sturdy knife, and again, a knife that you can be able to actually carry and use, but yet still, robust enough to take a lot of punishment that I wanted because of being on the fire department.
Yep.
So it almost quantified all of my work and my design, my build, materials, all of that kind of culminated at that moment of the second generation XM18.
Okay.
And that's when I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's when the batch sizes kind of started growing.
Okay. Because the demand is going up, right? People are like,
the demand skyrocketed.
Yeah.
At that point. And that's when I went to the Blade show that one year, and I had a bunch of XM18s on my table. And because I still had, one of the 8-foot tables there at the Blade show, and a fight almost broke out in front of the table. So that was when I'm like, how am I going to handle this? Right. And I'm like,
just to be clear, from people wanting to get the knives, right? So they were trying to get there and buy the knife, and it turns into, that's unfortunately not.
Yeah,
it's happened before.
Well, what happened there was, because before the show opened, everybody came over to the table, and I'm like, okay, guys, I'm not putting anything out until the show opened, because I'm like, holy crap, I got more people here than what I have knives. And they all they just wanted to start buying knives before the show opened. I'm like, no, I'm gonna sell them when the show opens. So they all stood there. And there's probably, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 people there. And I'm like, okay. And then as soon as I remember there was a guy standing in front of the table, and he's kind of a smaller guy, and they started shoving him out of the way. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. And so I was like, I kept the knives behind the table. I'm like, this is not going to turn out very good.
Yeah, right.
So that's when I remembered Ernie doing a lottery, and he was using a deck of cards. So I had Lori run down to the gift shop at the Galleria and grab a deck of cards. That was my first lottery.
Yeah.
And it was completely out of necessity.
Right. What year do you think that was, Rick?
Oh my gosh, that maybe 2009 or 10, maybe.
Oh wow, okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So that was, and that kind of started not the lottery, but that kind of that time period started propelling me into, okay, I got to start thinking of this as a business now, as a company.
Right, right.
Especially because of that lottery thing, it's like, I've got to make more knives, and I can't do it by myself with one helper part-time.
Yeah.
So at that time, I had my brother-in-law and sister-in-law had a friend who his company was relocating, so he was kind of like, out. And I told her, I said, well, tell him to come over to my shop. I'm in the shop right now. Tell him to come over. Maybe we can talk about, I can hire him, and he could work for me full time until, he finds something else. And I still wasn't even thinking like full-time employee.
Right.
And so Rob Reese is his name. He came over, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Super nice guy. It's like, I told him what I'm doing. I said, you're hired. And then, he came from a shop. They made firefighter like valves and stuff and hose fittings.
Ah, okay.
So this is all big stuff.
Yeah.
And he comes here, and we still laugh about it to this day, that, now he's making stuff that he can barely see with tolerances that are insane.
Right.
And
compared to big fire hose fittings and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Tolerance of plus or minus 5 thou,
Right.
And it's funny because him and I were just laughing the other day because, we got quite a history now. And I'm like, Rob, you could have ran.
Exactly. You had your chance, pal.
You probably should have just said, no, there ain't no way I'm getting this guy. So but I'm forever thankful that he decided to work for me, and we kind of grew together in a lot of, because he also went to the shows with me. He put knives together. Him and I, we'd machine the parts, we'd put the knives together. So it was still not even a production type format like a factory. It was just two guys making knives, and I taught him everything that I had learned on the machining side when it comes to knife making, and of course the knife making side and knife, why does this work and stuff like that. And so we, and it got to where now our batch size is growing to 75, and it's still it's just not enough. We go to a show, we have a lottery, and we're done and come back home, and so at that point I met Rob Orlando. He was actually a fan of my knives.
Yeah.
And so he asked about working for me, and I knew, okay, I'm going to need somebody to start with shipping and this and that. So I invited him along on the crazy train, and
suckered him in.
It suckered him in, and it was, he made knives. It was me, him, and Rob. At the bench, and especially before a show. So it was still, and our production was growing, but it was still, even at that time, pretty much a small shop, small operation.
The good news is you had a couple of really good guys, right? I mean, right, both very long-term guys, right? I know Rob was.
I thought he said Rob Orlando was working.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm a mistake.
Oh, sorry.
We have to take every opportunity to fuck with Rob O, but
I know
Rob Reese is such a good guy, right? Like you said, anybody who had a chance to interact with him at a show, just a down to earth, super nice guy, right? That, I don't know, that mix, certainly those you three guys, I think solid combo, especially in that kind of time, right? Because that's got to be a lot of pressure when there's that much going on and so much demand, and how do we scale this and keep the quality, and right? I mean, it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, it was. And that was, the one thing that I stuck to my guns on, no matter what, no matter how many calls I get for knives, and people saying that I was artificially, keeping knives from the market and all kinds of crap that you still hear about. And it's like, which was absolutely totally false. We were, us three guys was doing as much as we could. But one thing I never, ever, compromised on, that was quality of the build. And because, as I explained to everybody down at my shop right now, my name is on that knife. At the end of the day, it's not Rob Orlando Knives. It's not Rob Reese Knives or anybody else down there. It's Rick Hinderer Knives. My name is on the knife, and if it's a crap product, they're not going to go after, they're going to say, well, Rob Reese made a suck ass knife.
Right.
No, it's Rick Hinderer made a suck ass knife, and that's why, never ever, I always been 100% involved in every part of the build, and I still am to this day, because that's a big thing, and they know it down at the shop. And what's really been cool is having that has transferred over into their perception. And which is really, really cool, because it's like Amanda Yoder, she is actually we just promoted her to manager in finishing and build. And she's absolutely fanatical about the quality.
Yeah.
And it's really cool, because I don't even have to, we go up and we look at blade finishes and this and that. And I mean, she's looking at stuff underneath a loop, and these are production knives, but she's like, do you see that? And I'm like, well, let me stick my tongue on my other side of my mouth and look at it, and I don't know if I see what you're seeing. and we laugh about that, me and Amanda, but I walk away and I'm just brimming with pride,
Oh yeah.
because I'm like, I know that, every knife that goes out has my name on it, is exactly what I would put out
Yeah.
if I was sitting at the bench. And so having that attitude, it's really cool to see that being transferred over into your employees. It gives you that sense of easement, knowing that I know that they're putting out absolutely 100% top-notch product.
Yeah, you'd much rather have someone like Amanda that you got to say, okay, yes, I understand your concern, and talk her off the ledge a little bit, than
Right.
than in the other direction where it's like, whoa, wait a second,
Yeah,
this
what
came
the
back,
heck?
and what's going
Yeah.
on, and
Yeah, exactly. And it's like she looks through the finishes on the blades, and I could say, right here that we don't get anything back on fit and finish. It's like, and she's like, well, do you see that? And I'm like, no, and I don't know what you're looking at, but thank you, because she'll set it aside. And Kim and Sean, they're the same way. We have a new assembler named Tia, and she's the guy that is doing my shipping, that we hired for shipping. He's a really good hire. He's like, he said, I think Tia's making the best knife now. And which was nice because she's working for me for a month and a half. So in a month and a half, he's able to look at it and say, man, these things are spot on.
yeah,
So it's I've got a really good crew, and in the early days, I mean, it was tough for me because I was transitioning from a strict knife maker into now a business person.
right.
And that was a very, very difficult transition, because I just want to make knives. And when I found out how much taxes the employer has to pay, that has nothing to do with the employee. You can ask Lori about my rant that night.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm like, why am I paying this? I don't know, just because. Oh, okay, so it's extortion. So I can stay in business. I get it. And it's my accountant's like, yeah, just pay it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and actually you could ask Rob Orlando about a really funny story. The night him and I went out to dinner, the night that he was going to ask me about hiring him that was the day that I found out what my taxes was going to be.
Oh boy.
And I was like, I ain't hiring anybody else. This is freaking bullshit. And poor Rob's sitting there going, I guess I'm not going to ask him for employment.
That's funny.
But it ended up working out, well, and since then I've hired a lot of people, but it was, the business portion of it started to become more and more upfront with me.
Yeah.
And it was, and I filled up my shop, Roscoe's, I filled it up with machines, and I'm like, okay, we cannot grow anymore. This is it. This is maxed out. And at the same time, my accountant was telling me, he said, the amount of money that you're spending on outside water jet services, you could own a water jet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, you need to buy a water jet. Oh, cool. So at that, and I'm looking and I'm like, yeah, well, I don't have any place to put it.
Right.
And so that was a big turning point in my life, Lori's life, and Rick Hinder Knives. That was the big growth at that point, the big
step. Yeah.
And it was pretty much, do I want to be satisfied where I'm at and don't go anywhere else? Or do I want to make that step? Because if I make that step, I am jumping down the rabbit hole. There is no return.
Yep.
And so Lori and I thought about it long and hard. I thought about it long and hard, and I bribed Lori to go along with it. But But
deception, whatever it takes.
deception, yeah.
Yeah.
All you guys know about that. But honey, I need this machine. So
Yeah.
I needed a water jet, and along with that, I needed a new building. So, so I was like, actually for a while we looked at businesses in town, like in a business district, and I'm like, I told Lori, look, to me, if I had to go to work, if I had to drive to another building across town, it's like me going to work. I've never worked a day in my life, and I'm not starting now.
Yeah.
So
don't say that in the middle of the financial conversation though about not working a day in your life.
Yeah. Well, it's like I'm a bum. I mean, really, like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, well, actually, I've never worked, so I'm a bum.
Yeah. I roll out of bed. I walk across the driveway.
I make cool shit. I mean, come on. So I was like, okay, well, what about just building a new building here on the property? And she was like, okay, that way I'm closer to home. And so I started designing this new building, and it started out pretty small. And in other words, small as in, I think it started out like 8,000 square feet. And then it went to, the builder was like, both builders that I had like prospectus out to. They're like, well, it's actually easier to make it square, make it 10,000 square feet. And I'm like, okay, all right, that sounds good. Same amount of money when you're looking at a steel building to go 10,000, it would be 8,000. And I got it. And I'm looking at that point, it was like a 1-story building. And I'm like, this is all the office space I have? There's really not a lot of growth because Rob Orlando's head is so big, as you know, Mark. He needs a big freaking door to fit it through.
Yeah, right. No, his head's big, the hair is tall. There's a whole thing. It's a combination of things. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm like, I was thinking of Rob at that time. So I decided I need a second floor, or to make the building even bigger, footprint wise. And they told me that it was cheaper to go up than out, which is true. You're not taking up as much land, and it's easy to get an extra length of steel to go up than it is out. So we decided to go 14,000 square feet, and that was like, and of course Lori, she's like, oh God,
I remember talking to you around this time, and you're like, well, it's getting bigger and it's getting more complicated, and I got to have bathrooms that are a certain size, and then I got to scale this and that, and
Yep. A women's and men's bathroom. What the hell? Really? I'm like, but hey, you got to have it. It's a commercial building.
Yeah.
And then, so we ended up, I worked with the architect. We got all that, squared away. And at that same time, I needed to buy this water jet. It was getting towards the end of the year. My tax attorney says, you really need to get it before the end of the year.
Yeah, you got to spend that money now.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. So knowing that I wouldn't be able to put it in the shop until spring when the new shop was done. So I bought this, and the water jet was, I don't know, 200 and some thousand, 220,000 or something like that. And I'm like, oh God, I'm not going to be able to use it, and I'm paying on it for 4 months. But I went ahead and did it. And so Omax, the company that makes a water jet, so they said, you really don't want to store it in the winter in a cold environment because, it may have water left in the lines. So
right.
I'm like, oh shit. So I thought, well, I'll put it in the garage.
Right.
So I put all the water jet and all the parts and everything still in crates in my garage. And I used to tell people when I would walk through the garage, I'd say, well, that's my Lamborghini.
Right.
Yeah. And that was the most, that was torture. Being a machine geek and not being able to play with a new machine.
Right.
I mean, walking by it, I'd go over and I'd sniff it, new machine smell.
So I think you talked about that at the end of the last episode. So by this point, the original big shop, Roscoe's Today, I was in there toward the tail end, and like you said, it was packed, right? I mean, it was wall to wall in there. And then you had built an equipment shed kind of building, right? Kind of in just below that. Yeah. And so, didn't you have machines stored in there for a while too? Before
I had one. So
okay.
During that time, I bought a Haas DT1.
Okay.
And I'm like, shit, I don't have any place to put it. So I put it over in the machinery shed because it was summer. Now that shed's doesn't have heating or cooling, and so I actually ran 3-phase electric over there just for that machine.
Okay.
And I didn't do too much with it over there before I ended up, I actually put that machine in another area of the shop to where it was warm.
Okay.
Until the new shop was built.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, that whole time period is just kind of, I'm sitting there, I'm looking down towards the front of the field, and as I'm seeing that shop go up, and I'm like, this is going to be awesome. I go down every day, even when, inside the shop, there's nothing in there, and just dream, it's like, wow.
It's a big space.
Mm-hmm. I was like, look at all this room. I'm like, and I'm starting to second guess myself. I'm like, this is a little bit bigger than what I should have went, and it's like, oh my God. And but the first, when we first moved in, we got all the machines up here down to the shop, and I was able to get my water jet up and running. And I told everybody, I said, that's my water jet. I'm learning it. And at the same time, I got a Citizen lathe. The Citizen, that was my Grail machine from way back.
Okay.
I mean, that type of lathe machining, it always fascinated me. And so
this is like a screw machine for people that aren't familiar, right?
Yeah. It's like a screw machine. It's very, very high tolerance, technical. They use the Citizen watch company. Yep. They use Citizens for making watch parts and mostly medical grade stuff.
Yeah.
So it's the type of machining is different. The way the lathe is different than a conventional lathe, and it uses like a sliding headstock, and without getting into a lot of technical, but it's you can machine very, very high quality, very precise parts quickly,
right?
And it runs on its own. You set it up and it can run on its own. And so, but the Citizens are also very expensive machines, and so I knew I'd made it to a certain degree when I could be able to buy a Citizen.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's the only machine in my shop that I don't know how to run. And the reason is because I got the water jet, the Omax, and the Citizen at the same time. And I didn't have the time to get both of them online. So I was like, I told the guy that worked for me at the time, who was my like main CNC programmer. I said, "You learn the Citizen, I'll learn the water jet." And ended up, I learned the water jet, got the water jet going. I ran it for probably a year and a half, and the business grew to a point. I was at that point I was getting about 17 employees. And my involvement with the day-to-day of the like machining, running a machine, bead blasting blades, that was now gone. I was the company owner who had to sit in the office and go over, project management, HR stuff, all of that stuff that is from running a company.
So that time frame from you and the two Robs, and then at the kind of the tail end of the previous shop, there were a couple people in there, right, helping out with stuff.
Yeah,
but because the space was small, it was still a very, very small crew, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it was 6 or 7 employees at the time, but with the way it was spaced out, it was cramped.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
it was cramped.
So that time frame from having 2 people, even from just having a part-time helper, to having 2, to having 6 or 7, to, oh my God, I got this giant shop and I need people to help run the machines, and boom, 17 people.
Right.
On the big timeline, that was in a pretty small amount of time to go through that transition, right?
Yes. We're looking at a time frame of maybe 5 years.
Right.
So yeah, maybe about 5 years, because I was in Roscoe's, I think 6 years. So from the time of which was past, like 2 years of being at Roscoe's, and then the first 3 years down there, that type of explosive growth, was in about a 5-year time frame.
So what was that like for you to you were just starting to get into it, that realization that, oh snap, now I got a company to run, right? It quickly gets to be less about making knives, right? Because you're not getting to do any of that kind of work.
For me, yeah.
Yeah. And more into the business piece of it.
Yeah. And that would, and it grew from 17 employees to 27 employees.
Wow.
And it was, again, the day to day for me, I would go down to the shop and it was looking over, reports, and it's like, oh, I got quarterly taxes. Oh, I got this I got to do. Oh, that. And at the end of the day, I'm like, I didn't get to make a knife.
Right.
I didn't get to cut out a blade. I didn't get to forge anything. I didn't get to, and that's something that it's not that I woke up one day and it's like, okay, I want to put a suit and tie on. I want to be this.
Right.
It was actually the opposite. I woke up one day and I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, creating is breathing, and it was kind of like, I mean, I was having a good time. Don't get me wrong. It was, the running a company and the satisfaction of 27 people, their livelihoods were depending on things that I had come up with. All of that stuff was really cool. Growing a business and the community acceptance that I had on that was unbelievable. And so that part of it was a great thing. But I didn't realize, and again, of course, our production went up. Now we're talking the batch sizes went up quite a bit, and then now we have project management, because you have this many blades. Now you have to make sure that all the production on the machines are dedicated to all these parts that go with that. So when the blades come back from the grinder and they're ready to be assembled into knives, you have all the parts ready to start putting knives together. So the dynamic of making knives changed drastically.
Yeah.
And instead of like, okay, I'm going to make 5 blades, I got 5 handles, okay, and it totally changed into, if you screw up not making sure that Robbie Reese knows that we need 500 handle nuts, and you're like, oh crap, I forgot about that. Okay, how are you going to pay the payroll for 27 employees? Right. So it becomes very, very stressful. And in a way that, and I'm back here like, I don't want to do that. Because if I wanted to be a manager of a company, I would have went to college. I would have chose a different career path, and I'm a knife maker. Right. I create things, and this was, a realization I came to a couple of years ago that, I need to, if it's the same as breathing, I need to breathe. I'm suffocating. And even though I really like where Rick Hinderer Knives has gone, I really like what I've done in the industry and the marketplace, I, as a person, was I need to change gears here,
Yeah.
but that's not an easy thing to do,
Right. Especially when there's so much in motion and people relying on you now, right? You got a bunch of people's livelihood in your hands and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it became, it's a whole lot easier to turn a little skiff than it is the Titanic, and
Yep.
and it's not really what I wanted to turn it. I'm excited about the company. I'm excited where it's going. I'm excited about my customer base. All of that is there. It really had nothing to do with the company. It had to do with me personally.
Yeah.
And so I decided that, I need to fire this person, because this person sucks as a company owner, and he sucks as a manager. He sucks at all of this, but he does pretty good making and designing knives. So maybe this person needs to do that.
Yeah.
And that realization, it's like, okay, but what about the company? And so I started looking for somebody. My attorney told me, he's also kind of like my life coach, my business coach, my friend, and he's like, you just need a general manager. You need somebody who will run Rick Hinderer Knives the way you want it run, but you do what you want to do.
Right. Right. So I think for some people that thought would be really difficult, right? The idea of what? Somebody else is going to run my baby?
Yeah.
But at the same time, in this case, it was an enabler for you, right? It was an exit to be able to go back to doing more of what brought you joy with this whole thing in the first place, right?
Exactly. The circle. And the thing about it is, it is tough. It is tough. And I struggle with it every day. And luckily I have a young guy who, he just, got out of the military. He was a first lieutenant. He graduated from the Citadel. He's a really good leader, and he's helped me out a lot in that struggle of, wait a minute, no, don't do this, you do this. And he's very patient with me. Yeah. And he has a way of saying that, hey, Rick, shut the F up. He has a really patient way of doing that. It's like, I got this, now, but the thing about it is he's proven to me that he's got it.
Exactly.
And not by telling me, he actually, I see what he's doing. I'm like, holy cow, okay, this is cool. So I'm like, I can step away. I could like not even go down to the shop for a week, and I come back. It's like everybody's happy. Everybody's, we got great knives going out, and I'm like, awesome. And so it's gotten to, when I go down there, I'm still, even now, I very rarely go up in my office. I'm running machines. I'm just one of the guys, having a great time down at the shop. I've got 2 machining centers that I make stuff. If I'm working on handles, if they need this done or whatever, I'm doing it. I'm changing tools just like what I used to do. And I'm working on knife designs. I have my own little area of my big shop now.
Yeah.
And I've got my own laser, and everybody knows, and I think everybody's happier because they see that I'm really happy. I'm smiling. I'm laughing with them. I'm cracking up, and it's not so much tension of I'm the owner and, where is production? Where is this? Because I have a general manager. He's taking care of that.
Right.
He's doing that, and it just kind of, it came full circle in the shop, and it found out they like working for Sam, my general manager. They like working for him. He's one of them. And I think if I were to talk to a business class, I would say that the owner can't be the general manager, because the owner is always the owner.
Yeah.
And not to get into all that stuff, that's for another day, but it's something that I learned, and it helped me to transition to where I'm at now, which is great for the company. because it gets me doing what the company needs me to be the designer, to be the innovator, to go and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And interact in a way, let them do what they know how to do and what I taught them over the past, 7-8 years. And I do what I do best. And it's becoming a really, really fine-tuned machine right now. And it's allowed me, to think about, even, okay, going a little further with, this, not break away from the company, but actually enjoying being a knife maker again.
Right, exactly.
And during that time, guess what? My 14,000 square foot shop, it's too small. The shop that I thought was cavernous and I will never outgrow.
Right.
Yeah, well, it's full.
Right.
So we can't put any more machines in it, and I'm looking at doubling the size of it.
Oh, wow.
So I don't tell Lori.
Yeah, I'll keep that just between you and I.
Yeah. But so in October of last year, I had the opportunity of purchasing the neighboring farm.
Yeah.
And this was something we weren't even thinking about it. And our neighbors, which are wonderful, wonderful people, had farmed that farm for about 40 years. And they told us that they were downsizing and moving into town. And I'm like, oh man, I wonder who the neighbor's going to be. This is going to kind of suck if it's somebody,
Not as much fun as us.
Yeah. And so Lori, it was prior to that, she had mentioned to me about, because she kind of wanted to go back to her roots, which is raising feeder calves. And that's what she was really good at, and go back to both of our roots in horses. And I'm like, I was teasing her one day. I'm like, well, Lori, why don't we just buy the Cannon farm? And the barns are already there.
Yeah.
And so it started turning into why don't we look into it? It was going up for auction. So I talked to the bank and they were like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so I went to the auction, ended up with being the final bidder.
Oh, wow.
And it's 137 acres. And I didn't sleep that night. I laid there in bed thinking, what the hell did I just do?
That's definitely a theme, right? It isn't the first time probably that you did that.
Oh yeah. Balls to the wall,
Yeah.
Put your nuts on a chopping block and let's see what happens.
Right. It'll probably be okay. What's the big deal?
What could go wrong? Surely. And so but the main reason was on this farm is which the barns and the farm, the homestead is actually in our front yard. It's actually closer for me to go to the farmstead than it is to go to my shop.
Yeah.
It's that close. I think you've been here, Mark. You've seen, and so I'm like, the barn the bank barn is pre-Civil War, and I'm really into history stuff. So I was like, man, this is just, it's like a big freaking antique. It's really cool. And
right. And he had restored it or something, right?
Not that one. The other one, what you're thinking about is what I told you before. That was what he did. It's a building, like a barn on the property. It was the Tuscarawas County, Ohio's the sheriff's department stable back in the 1800s.
Okay.
So what Fred did, the owner of the farm, he also restored old barns. So he bought this, dismantled it, and then they rebuilt it right on the property in the farms, in the like barnyard.
Okay.
And that was their garage. And they rebuilt it the exact way it was originally built back in the middle 1800s. And it was, when I first seen it a few years ago, I just fell in love with it. And because it looked to me like an old blacksmith shop.
Yeah.
And I told Lori, I said, I want to buy that farm because I want to start the forge up again.
Nice.
and I want to make an old blacksmith shop. So she was like, that's because she's always wanted to see me get back into forging. And I talked to a lot of other people that are really pushing me to get back into bladesmithing. And so, but I wanted to do it. I wanted it to be where I didn't have to. I didn't have to forge knives or make billets of Damascus, to make a living. I wanted it to be like a hobby.
Right.
Like how a lot of people actually get into knife making.
Right. You literally has been full circle, right? That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And the dairy barn, which is kind of modern, had what we call tank rooms. And right now, those are being converted with electricity. That's going to be my knife shop.
That's fantastic.
And that's my knife shop. So, I have a knife factory.
Right.
But one of the psychological things, it never has been my shop because I have employees working in there.
Yep.
And now my shop always looks like a bomb went off in it, but that's just the way I like it, damn it.
Right, because it's my shop.
It's my shop, and so I make, and it's kind of crazy when I tell people, I say, yeah, I'm making a knife shop. And they're like, you have a knife shop.
Right.
And I'm like, no, my knife shop. And I'm going to get back into making knives like I did in the old days, one at a time, by hand, just like the old days. Whether it's forging, stock removal, I'm going to go back to being like a true blue knife maker, like when I started in 1987.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Looking forward to that. And like I said, it's a full circle thing. And Sam's doing a great job with the company on that aspect. Hinderer Knives will continue growing, and Rick Hinder will continue being a very integral part always of Rick Hinderer Knives. But at the same time, you'll see more of Rick Hinder in the knives that I'll be making, and some of the special projects, and all of that, and all of that will go up on my website. My website I took over last year, and everything on the website, all the website work is done exclusively by me. So when things get screwed up, that's me.
Blame Rick.
I can't blame that on an employee.
There you go. Now that's really cool. We've talked a couple times in previous episodes where we noticed interesting things around the net, and knife things that came up that we thought were cool. And we've made that comment that how cool it is to see Rick having fun, and that comes through, right? People pick that up. The fact that you're finding more enjoyment in it now than maybe you have in a while. And that's just super cool to see, right? Because regardless of what someone's job is, knife maker or otherwise, it can turn into a grind, and sometimes a super stressful grind. And then suddenly it's like, why the hell am I doing this at all? Right? How did I even get here? And to be able to have the opportunity or to follow the right steps to get to where you can actually go enjoy it again for the reasons that you got into it, that's pretty awesome. And not everybody has that opportunity, so good for you for finding a way to make that happen.
Thanks. That it was a tough road. I mean, no getting over it, but more tough in the fact of be careful what you wish for type of thing.
Yes.
Because it all of a sudden I woke up and like, I like what I'm doing, but there's something missing. I'm suffocating here. And once I came to the realization like that, it's like, oh man, yeah. And finding the team that can take my vision and go forward with it. It's really, everything came together, and it enabled me to be able to get this farm, and it's like divine intervention. It's like it came along at the perfect time. It's like, wow, this is what I was thinking about doing. I certainly didn't need to buy that farm to do it.
Right.
And it certainly had nothing to do with the fact that now I can get 600 yards rifle range instead of 300. Had nothing to do with that.
No. That's just gravy.
No, yeah. I found that out later, much later.
I'm making the winky eye toward Lori right now.
Yeah. But yeah, and I'll even get back on a horse and and I'm not going to get back to training. I have no business getting on a 2-year-old. I'm 56 years old with an artificial hip, so no breaking horses anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everything else, it's great. It's absolutely great, and again, Rick Hinderer Knives, we're at a place in the market right now that's fantastic. We have partnerships, a lot of things, going great with that. Great friends in the industry that I love, talking to, and it's just a really good time, it's just like when I went out to Chris Reeve Knife a couple of years ago. We took vacation out to the Sawtooth Mountains, and of course Tim and Ed were like, well, you better stop here. And it's like, well, of course, thanks for the invite. And it was just absolutely wonderful to sit around a table and have some beverages, and Anne gave me an Impenda that she had in her pocket, because we were talking about slip joint knives, modern slip joints, and I was working on one, and they were working on one, and she said, "Here, hand me an Impenda she had in her pocket." And I was like, this is why I love being in this industry, and it's just that's part of it that also is just drives. I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Yeah. It really is a big community.
Oh, absolutely. And we all have so much fun, once we get back to the shows and stuff. But yeah, and we've got so many new projects coming up.
Yeah.
That I'm really excited about, is some new opportunities and things like that. Because again, I'm one that I don't like. I'm always like, okay, we did that. What next? What next?
Right.
Right. And again, you talk about that having fun. And people could notice that, like the card series.
Yes, that was the example we talked about.
Yeah. And when I did the card series, I do the card series for Black Friday every year. We kind of started that, and I do a different one. So this past year I did a Battlefield pickup, and the Battlefield pickup that came out of that's the finish on different models that we do. XM18 would do a Battlefield pickup. And I did that. I started that a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago actually, and that came from my love of vintage military and history, and it was like, okay, I want to make this knife look like it was actually what we call Battlefield pickup. That comes from, like, you pick up a weapon off the battlefield.
Right,
that you need. You lost your weapon. You pick up one that maybe that person doesn't need it anymore, and that's your weapon. They call it a Battlefield pickup. And so I wanted the knife to actually look like it'd been through a battle. That means making it look all scarred up and everything.
Right, relic.
Yeah, relic. And at first, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make a knife look like shit. I mean, and. So, and that's kind of what I got from a lot of other people, was like, yeah, really? And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, again, when I went from art knives into using, I was like, screw it. I don't care if nobody buys it, and I'll keep them. And yeah, well, it's kind of pretty popular right now.
Yeah, it's yeah, people have really grabbed onto it. They're fun.
Yeah, exactly. So the card knives was a Battlefield pickup. I've done a lot of other series Battlefield pickup. So being that I know I'm on to something, I'm like, why not extend this love of military and vintage military and World War II, and I've got a very big collection of vintage military knives, and so I'm like, why not kind of you take that a little bit further, than a battlefield pickup, and actually make my version of a military knife. And the first thing that came to my mind, K-bar.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows the K-bar. Now,
obvious choice. Yep.
Exactly. And now, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to make a K-bar. I'm going to make it in my style. It's still, it's a K-bar. You look at it, it's I can't remember the pattern number, but it's a marine fighting knife or utility knife. It's a K-bar. But when you look at it, you see my design elements and my build elements in the knife. So when I was designing it, and my good friend John Stitt, I've known John for a few years now, and I'm really good friends with the folks at K-Bar, and I've actually done a collaboration with them on a couple of TDI knives.
Yep.
So I called up John. I said, John, here's the deal, and I know I don't need to have his permission to make a K-Bar knife. Obviously, the design is not a protected thing. Other makers have made a K-Bar,
Right.
but I don't do it that way. So I called up John, and I'm like, John, I said, how about let's do a reverse collaboration. I want to license the K-Bar from you, and I'll make it.
Yeah.
And he is like, oh, well, we've never done that before. And I'm like, well, that's the only way I'm going to make it.
Yeah.
So if you say no, then okay, I'm not going to make it.
Right. Yeah.
It's the only way I'm going to do it. So not that I was pressuring him into, into accepting, something like that. And for me, it was kind of weird. It's like, I'm paying him royalty for, usually it's the other way around.
Right. Right.
And so he was like, he's like, I love it. He said, let's do it. What do you need? And I said, well, obviously this is a K-Bar Hinderer. It's not, I need the K-Bar. I want the K-Bar logo on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, will you allow me? And he's like, absolutely. So this is the first time K-Bar has ever done it. It's the first time it's ever been, where actually it has the K-Bar. It's a K-Bar, but yet it has Hinderer, and it's a Hinderer knife.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I'm really excited about that project. I'm getting ready to release them. It's these knives turned out. It's really bad because I just want to keep them all. Damn it! Yeah, I can't do that because they're pretty expensive to make. But
Right.
It's just especially my love of military history and everything. It's like, oh, yeah, I can't wait to get these out. Doing the marketing, and I do all the marketing for Rick Hinderer Knives also, and as far as pictures and all that stuff, and that's going to be so much fun.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
And we're also going to be doing another project with them that's going to follow up immediately afterwards. Will be the I am making an EK. So
Yeah.
K-Bar bought John Eck Commando knives. They bought the Eck knife. And I happen to I've collected for many years, extensive collection of Eck knives. So when they bought it, I'm like, ooh, even back then I was like, man, that'd be cool to make an Eck knife. And so I did. And I made two versions of it that are my versions. And it's going to go the same way as the K-Bar with John Eck logo on the blade and the whole deal.
Oh, that's super cool.
So yeah, so those are some really couple new projects that'll be coming out here real soon. That I can't wait because it's you talk about me having fun. That's me having fun.
Oh yeah, yeah, no doubt. Hey Tom, what episode was it when we talked about the Eck knives? You brought it up. I don't remember what episode it was though.
Was it we had to pick 5 or something?
Oh yeah, okay. We were 5 knives you should know about.
Yeah, I think that was what it was.
Yeah. Now we
Really
talked about
really
those
cool
knives.
history.
Yeah, really neat.
Yeah. Now that's what I've got. I got quite a few the original World War II Eck knives, in the collection, and looking at them, they're they're not what you would think of. They certainly aren't a Randall,
right,
but
right.
But for me, being in history, it harkens back a time in this country when we needed weapons. We didn't need pretty stuff. We needed weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%, Rick. And if anyone ever holds one, there's no doubt on what you do with it.
Right. I mean, exactly.
There's no instructions needed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You know exactly what and that's where, when I told John I wanted to make an Eck, but I wanted it, of course I didn't want to copy the Eck, but I wanted to copy the Eck, but at the same time put my own flair into it. And that's what's, these turned out pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty wild. I told Les George, I said, "You're getting the first one." He's like, "Send it."
Yeah, I can't wait to see what you did, Rick.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing them, man.
Thanks. Oh, I guess it was a project that is dear to my heart, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and it just, I can't wait to see what the public's going to think of these, and they're, even though they're straight up, they're my version, they're very usable designs. I mean, it's, you can put the K-bar in a sheath and go out and do whatever with it. It's not just a looking knife. I made it to maybe surpass the original K-bar. If you could do that, and that's honestly, it's a bold statement, because
I was gonna say,
yeah, it's a bold statement because of the fact that there was a guy that was telling me, he said, knives nowadays are so much better, and I looked at him and I'm like, that knife and that steel. I think we were actually talking about steel. It saved the free world, and
right,
and I think it did just well. I mean, I think it did pretty good. I mean, these soldiers, they relied on that, not to take pictures of, but actually to use it for every day. And it held up very well. And the thinness of the blade, the leather handles, or whatever you could say that, nowadays we have so much better. It did pretty good. It did pretty good.
Yeah. You must be talking about some alternate history where Instagram was not part of saving the free world, Rick. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're great knives.
Yeah.
I went as a missionary to Thailand, which, similar to Vietnam as far as climate, and I never had any issues with it. It's not stainless, but never had a problem.
Right. Exactly. And that's what, and I, with not only, a lot of my other series of knives that I started doing is my vintage series. And that was something that really took a lot of people off guard, because I'm like, okay, I'm making the blades out of 01, and I'm using natural walnut for the handles. And it really is like, people are like, really? You want to use 01? And there's a lot of knives made in the past, how many years back in the first part of the 20th century or 19th century through World War I, World War II, they're made out of 01. And again, I think they did pretty good, and
I often wonder how we actually settled this continent without stainless steel.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I know. How in the world could that happen? I mean, and even before that,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like it's I don't know, and I put the knives. I did the first batch of my vintage series, and it's been a huge success. And what really was cool was when I was getting so many emails of guys that are like, 01, this is awesome. I can sharpen it. I can do this.
Right,
I can do this.
exactly.
And now I had a customer, a dealer customer, said, I don't want any of that stainless. I want all 01.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. Cause I'm making the K-bar in both 01 and 3V. And he's like, I don't want that 3V shit. I want 01. I'm like, oh my God.
Sean's over there clutching his pearls. He's a 3V man.
Oh, hey, 3V's awesome. I love it. I've done a lot, especially fixed blades out of 3V. Love it. But this customer didn't like it.
Yeah.
He wanted '01.
Yeah.
So that's, but the only thing it's also, it's teaching a new generation, because
There you go.
they're and again, in the age of Instagram, it's like, if I look real close, oh my God, there's something on it. What is it? Rust? Oh, what do I do? Oil it.
Right.
So yeah, there's a little bit of that but I think in fairness to the new generation coming up, they're quick learners.
Yeah.
And and they're finding that, because I told them, just like the one thing that gives me a lot of pleasure when I come up to Roscoe's is my collection of vintage firearms, just sitting, taking it apart, oiling it, cleaning it, even if I don't need it.
Right. Yeah.
I'm handling it. I'm seeing all of the bumps, the bruises, the battle scars, and there's a real soothing feeling in that.
Yeah.
And
we just had a guest on who's a museum curator, and that was a big piece of what she talked about with some of these historical weapons, right? Whether it's edged weapons or guns or whatever, is just the visceral piece of it. Like actually handling it is a whole different animal altogether.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I've a lot of friends that see my museum in Roscoe's. They're like, "This is a museum," and I say, "Yeah, but what's cool is you can actually handle it."
Yeah.
And it's like, I have a Japanese Type 99 rifle with shrapnel damage.
Yeah.
And you hold it, you look at it, and you're like, I mean, this was an enemy soldier, but it was a soldier.
Yeah.
Who was carrying this, and the area of the shrapnel damage, more than likely he didn't survive it. And a lot of these, the artifacts that I have, capture weapons. I just got a captured Mosin Nagant 9130 from the Korean War, with the affidavit from the story from the veteran that got it.
Yeah.
And I'm holding it, and I'm like, holy cow! This is came from the Chosin Reservoir. And it's just
Right.
it's you're literally holding history in your hand, and every and all the rust on the barrel, the dents in the stock, all of that. It's like, it's not a new gun, but it's more beautiful than any brand new $12,000 side by side.
It's very honest.
Exactly, and so that's why I absolutely love the everything that goes with the vintage military. And also the other thing is, and that's what's got me into a lot of the new stuff that you're going to see coming up from my personal shop, my stuff is going further and further into the old way of military arms and rifles and weapons and stuff like that. Because some of this, and I tell you, it's just when knife makers come to my shop, up at Roscoe's, I'm like, oh, you got to see this because of the workmanship that went into this. It's like, I got a German Reichsmark revolver, it's called a Reichsrevolver, but it's like this thing. It was built in the late 1800s, but it is perfect. Everything. How did they do it? They made it by hand, and I'm like, how in the hell did they do it? So it's things like that I want to kind of duplicate on some of my knives to kind of tell the story of history that I think needs to be told. I can do it in the art with my knives, and that's going to be a lot of fun going forward.
Oh yeah, that's super, super cool. So Rick, we're going to run out of time, but one other thing that I think we probably want to talk briefly about before we go is your involvement in a little bit of legislation that happened in Ohio.
Oh yeah. So a few years ago, I've been wanting to make automatic knives, and I have made automatic knives in the past, but in Ohio, the way the law was you could not manufacture automatic knives, switchblades. So I'm like, I'm a knife company, and I would like to be able to entertain a military contract for automatic knives, and there's no way I could be able to do that. So I went and I talked with my representative, and he's like, yeah, because I told him, I said, it's about jobs. I can hire more people. And so they like to hear, it's about jobs and stuff. So we kind of got the ball rolling on that. This was a few years ago. And he had talked to, they went and talked to Senator Joe Eaker. And he was like, yeah, this sounds great. So we started getting people on board. And of course, knife rights came along, and Doug Ritter and Todd Rathner, they were, they were a big spearhead of getting this thing done.
Yes.
And so it ended up, but I learned a lot about politics as far as how slow it is, how things work. And because I'm like, hey, it's a good law, pass it. Let's get it done. I want to make automatic knives. It's not that easy. So at one point, it seemed like the law was kind of, what we want to get done was really faltering. And I happened to be at the, I was at the Christmas party of my accounting agency, and Scott Wiggum, who is the representative from my area, was there. And I'm like, I'm talking to him. I was like, Scott, what's up with this, with the bill? Where's it going? What's it? And he was kind of, well, not, and I'm telling him, I'm just like, amped up, and I'm like, yeah, but this, and this. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, the senator, he's, just downstairs, and I'm like, okay, well, can I talk to him? And he said, yeah. So he went down, got Senator Frank LaRose and brought him up, and I'm talking to Frank. Frank's like, oh yeah, I know about it. And yeah, let's, we're going to do this. We're going to get it going. So anyway, it breathed new life into it.
Yeah.
And it was a couple of years ago, and it started building momentum. So they asked me about coming down to Columbus and testifying before the House or the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, I was nervous. I'm like,
yeah, I bet.
Holy shit! They got all these senators up there, and the chairman of the Senate, and all this. Mr. Chairman, and I'm like, some hillbilly from northeastern Ohio. And I'm there, and it was my turn. They said, we call on Rick Hinderer of Rick Hinderer Knives to come forward, and I'm like, oh shit. So I'm like, I don't want to like totally freeze up. So I get up there, and I'm just like, I had a prepared statement, and I said that, and they're like, okay, we'll now accept questions. I'm like, huh? Oh, and I thought I was just going to read a statement. Shit. And so they, they started asking questions, and I remember everything was going good. And the one guy, he was the senator from Cincinnati, and he asked me, he said, why do you think this law got passed to begin with back in the 60s? And I'm like, and all of a sudden it just popped into my head. Because of a movie. And he's like, and they all looked at me, and they were like, a movie? I was like, yeah, West Side Story. I said, pretty much because that movie is the reason why this law, the law banning switchblades came to effect. I said,
that's why. Jets versus Sharks.
Yeah. And so they were all like, wow, okay. And And so anyway, they actually looked it up, and they came back to me and said, you were right. And I'm like, oh God, thank God. But no, really, I had just remembered this from a long time ago.
Yeah.
Why it popped into my head at that moment, I have no idea. So anyway, I went back down to Columbus to testify before the House committee, and that was more contentious.
Yeah.
And but I kept my cool. I was like, that ended up it passed. I can't remember, was it November?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. But it ended up I was actually talking to Scott Wiggum, texting with him while it was being voted on the Senate floor.
Ah.
And which was kind of cool. And So I was watching the votes come in, and it passed, and I was like, wow. And it took a little bit for the governor to sign it, but it was no problem. It passed pretty much overwhelmingly, complete bipartisan bill, and it's something I'm really proud of. I did a lot of work on helping get that going. Knife rights, Todd Rathner. I tell you what, he impressed the hell out of me. And when he works on something, let me tell you, I seen it firsthand. He works. And I tell you what, I'm going to publicly say my hat is tipped to Knife Rights. And if you see him at a show, thank him.
Yep.
Because I tell you what, Todd, when he needed to be in Columbus, he was in Columbus. And I remember I was sitting in the rotunda of the State House. We were getting ready for one of the meetings I was in. And Todd and I were talking, just sitting on a bench, and this lady comes walking through the rotunda, and Todd jumped up and went over and started talking to her. Hey, the bill, this and that, and everything, and he introduced me to her, and she was, I can't remember if he was a representative or a senator, and I'm like, wow, now I know what I understand, because she was a Democrat, I think she was head of the Black Caucus, and I'm like, I understand now the amount of work, and she was a very pleasant lady, and listened to everything that Todd had to say and what I had to say, and I'm like, that's why you need to be there. You need to be there at the State House, and by Todd and Knife Rights sending, and all the money, it costs a lot of money to send him to all these places.
Right.
And I tell you what, I understand the importance of that now, because I've seen firsthand that money is not going to waste.
Yeah, stuff doesn't happen without it, right? That's the reality.
Exactly. So I'm looking forward to coming out with my first automatic.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be right around the time this episode goes to air. So yeah, if you listen to this, definitely check Rick's website or his Facebook group for some info, and check out the new Hinderer auto. That'll be very cool.
Yeah. I'm really excited about that. Really excited.
Awesome. Well, Rick, it's been another great conversation. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us again.
Well, thanks a bunch for having me. This was very enjoyable. It's just like sitting down in the pit and having a beverage and chatting.
Exactly.
Thanks, Rick.
So, yeah, maybe what we'll do is, as people should have realized from the conversation, Rick is not only a knife nerd, but he's a military history nerd, maybe of extreme proportion. And maybe we can trick you into joining us for a future episode about theater weapons. We've been talking about doing something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would love that. I would love that. I've got a pretty good collection of theater weapons, and it goes kind of along with the X sort of thing, the X knife sort of thing. They were absolute time capsule of what was going on at that time.
Yeah. So I don't know about Michael and Tom, but Sean and I might be able to meet up with you at Roscoe's and do that.
Oh, that would be
cool shit.
That would be so cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would love that.
That's kind of brutal, Mark.
You got a car?
I don't know.
I've got the bourbon.
Yeah.
We
can work this out.
Yeah.
All right. So a couple things we should touch on. One of the things, thank you, Michael, for reminding me about this. One of the things we wanted to ask our listeners to do, we had a bunch of folks do this when we first started doing the show, and that is go and leave us a review, if you don't mind, on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, I think it's called now. Those reviews are really helpful for us because it means we show up in search results, and it means more people hear the show. And that's kind of why we do these things, is to help people learn a little more about makers and some of their history and some important perspectives on things like some of the stuff you heard from Rick in the last couple episodes. So please go out and leave us an iTunes review. We'd really appreciate that. That really helps us. We also had some great support from all of our Patreon folks. and through our Facebook group, buying some merch to help support the show. So that's been very, very cool. So we really appreciate everyone. High five to everybody who joined us for that stuff. It's fantastic. It helps keep this thing moving and pays a gas bill for Sean and I to go to Roscoe's and allegedly
Just Sean
machine
and
guns. Whoa, hey, whatever. Hey, I don't know. It's Rick's place.
Man.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we appreciate everybody's help with all that stuff. Thanks for joining us in the Facebook group. We have great discussions there. We'll have to get Rick to snap a couple pictures for us, and we can share some photos of some of these cool historic pieces and maybe some of these new projects that he's been working on. That'd be a neat place to share them.
Yeah.
Hell
Let some listeners hear them.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're real happy to do that.
Again, Rick, thank you very much for taking the time. We really, really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
My pleasure, guys. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's been a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
Oh, yeah, man. Good times.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely.
it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Later, folks.
Cue the music.
See ya.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account, @CrineKnives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram @BirchTreeBlades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram @msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram @markofthemaker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.